they had to listen because of all the images on television and everything else about who was affected by Katrina.
This is Blair Durham with Black Wall Street Today, your media hub for all things Black entrepreneurship, politics, news, and events in Hampton Roads and beyond.
When I say black, y'all say Wall Street. Black Wall Street. Black Wall Street. When I say black, y'all say Wall Street. Black.
Greetings. I want to welcome you to this edition of Black Wall Street Today. I am your host, Blair Durham, and I get really excited about doing this work. I had one listener phone into the station to get information on one of our real estate investors from last week, and she made it a point to say to continue doing the work of Empowerment Talk Radio and that the information being provided is insightful and relevant and that she is a faithful listener. So shout out to you. Thank you so much. I want to encourage listeners to follow us on social media at Black Wall Street Today on Facebook and Instagram. Please visit our website at www.blackwallstreet.today and submit your information if you're interested in being featured on our platform. We are always looking for guests that can speak to various industries. For example, the technology industry. We're definitely interested in robotics and STEM technologies. We're interested in having makers on the show. We want to hear your story no matter where it is that you reside. So again, visit our website at www.blackwallstreet.today and submit your information. One of the most significant yet difficult to access opportunities for Black business owners is federal government procurement, the opportunity to sell products and services directly to the government. Although state and federal government programs, including SWAM, DBE, and HubZone certifications, aim to improve access to government contracts, our community still struggles to access the billions of dollars awarded on an annual basis to small business owners across the country. I recently heard it said that as Black business owners, we are provided a laundry list of hurdles to jump through, including classes to take, networking opportunities, gaining certification, signing up for emails, and completing really lengthy applications. Yet we typically lose to white women who are considered amongst the same minority population and thus are in fact our competition. The recent Virginia Beach, Virginia disparity study is a testament to these and other statistics surrounding the lack of equity in access to government contracts. I want to introduce our first guest at this time to help us better understand the landscape at the federal level. And I'm going to do something that I normally don't do. I'm going to actually read this gentleman's bio in its entirety, because I believe it's significant. Mr. Charles H. DeVoe is the Vice President of Programs and Business Development for the National Black Chamber of Commerce. Over the last 17 years, he's gained extensive experience as the liaison to the NBCC Global Federation of Chambers in North, Central, and South America, as well as the Caribbean, Europe, and Africa. The NBCC has evolved as a global advocate on behalf of Black businesses. The National Black Chamber of Commerce is dedicated to economically empowering, sustaining African-American communities through entrepreneurship, capitalistic activity within the United States, and via interaction with the Black diaspora. Mr. DeVoe has focused work on the unconventional challenges confronting African-American small businesses, its advocacy and opportunities, along with the operational challenges of nonprofit organizations in particular. His responsibilities include concept, implementation, administration, and management of the organization's programs. He also directs policies, initiatives, advocacy for public policy concerns, and represents the NBCC periodically on congressional subcommittees. Currently serving as the co-chairman of Economic Opportunity of the United States Department's U.S. Columbia Action Plan on Racial and Ethnic Equality, which is a program conceived to provide solutions for conflict resolution for the Colombian Civil War. Mr. DeVoe is the son of one of the original Tuskegee Airmen. He is a graduate of Indiana University. He spent over 13 years in various capacities with CBS Records and 10 years as a marketing consultant, developing campaigns for clients such as Michael Jackson, Prince, Janet Jackson, Sade, Earth, Wind and Fire, Pink Floyd, Bruce Springsteen, Luther Vandross, Teddy Pendergrass, and many more. Today, the NBCC is striving for entrepreneurial diversity with infrastructure development, ITC, housing, energy, agribusiness, cannabis, manufacturing, and natural resources with emphasis on socially responsive and inclusive practices. Mr. DeBow is presently overseeing project developments in Colombia, Cuba, Suriname, Jamaica, Ghana, Botswana, as well as Kenya. Mr. DeBow, are you there?
I am.
Well, welcome to the call. Thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor and a pleasure, and we have such respect for the Hampton University and the Tidewater community.
Fantastic. It's good to have you on, and thanks again for being here. Please talk a little bit about how you and your family got into this particular work, Chuck.
This is it really was a natural evolution. The chamber is actually founded by my sister and her husband, and they had been active in a political campaign for the campaign for the governor of Indiana, which was Evan Bayh at the time. And as a result of his winning the election, they were looking to fill certain spots in the administration, and one of those had to do with minority business contracting for the state, and it was a procurement type of position. In that position, the goal of it was to increase the amount of black businesses that were actually doing business with the state. Very similar to what you were mentioning in your entry on your entree about the ability for businesses to do business with the government. In this case, it was on the state level, and as a result of Harry Alfred, his efforts to dig in and be working directly for the governor, he had access to not only the databases but the decision makers. And they got into some things, and it upset the status quo. The people that had been usually getting these contracts 100% were now being challenged. And after a while, I think he had raised the numbers from something like less than 10% to over 16 to 26%, somewhere around in that range. And we're talking about like 1.6 to 6%. And in a state that pretty much had historically been doing what they do, like behind the scenes, and then kind of telling people life's okay, life is good. And so there were businesses themselves, the owners, saying, well, it's not okay. Things aren't going well. Right. And they got into it and dug it. In the beginning, and partially there's a somewhat of a naive type of element to a new administrator, such as the governor, coming in and changing things. And they didn't realize what Harry was doing until there was almost like a mutiny of top supporters. People were saying, hey, you're killing my business. You're taking, and in this case, we're talking less than 2%, 3%, 5% of what these majority-owned businesses had enjoyed for many years were now being forced to recognize guidelines and comply with guidelines. And we use that word guidelines. You're going to hear that a lot because it's not law. It's not written into law. You don't have to give these contracts or a percentage of, or even subcontract. And in many cases, it says that's what you're supposed to do, but it's not a law per se. So, make a longer story shorter, eventually, I mean, Harry, we'll have to get Harry on here one day to tell you the details of it, but he was threatened. He was, his kids were followed home from school. All kinds of stuff was going on. Getting pulled over, driving down the street, and all this was political pressure being put back on. And he was even asked by the governor to slow down. You're upset, you're rocking the boat, and to stop putting all these businesses in these contracts, and he was saying, well, that's my job, that's what I'm supposed to do, that's what you hired me to do. Well, eventually he resigned. He quit that job, and they were looking around saying, you know what we're missing here? We're missing the education, training, development element for businesses to understand the game. You know, there's one thing about filling out forms, getting certifications, but that's all that is to get you in the game. You can suit up and you can go and you can compete, but then what happens? So he and his wife Kay decided to form what was then called the Hoosier Black Chamber of Commerce in the state of Indiana. And after forming that and getting that up and going, they wanted to reach beyond the borders of the state, and it was ultimately decided to move to Washington, D.C. and found the National Black Chamber of Commerce, which was March of 1993.
And I'll interrupt you there just for a quick second, Chuck. This is Black Wall Street Today. I'm your host, Blair Durham. We're talking with Chuck DeBow, who is the Vice President of the National Black Chamber of Commerce. We're having a conversation about government contracting. Go ahead, Chuck.
Yeah, and so the National Black Chamber of Commerce was formed in March of 1993. It's a 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan, non-sectarian organization that's dedicated to the economic empowerment of African American communities throughout the nation and as well as the diaspora. The one thing I want to add to that is that even though we're named and known as the National Black Chamber of Commerce, in the last 10 years, and it's probably started even before that a little bit, around 2003, that we started receiving invitations from foreign governments and wanting to replicate business models of how the United States was using a vertical model for economic empowerment by including, in some cases, micro enterprise or small business in the whole economic structure. Whereas in many other countries, it's only in a lot of what used to be called the third world is now the emerging economies. They're opening up and figuring out that you got to include your people, not just let the Chinese or some foreign entity come in and say, hey, give us this opportunity, we'll give you this money, and we'll do this, that, and the other for you, but we're going to bring our own people, our own materials, and do it our way. And then when it's all said and done, you get maybe a road or an energy plant or something, but the added value and the economic impact on your community, on your country, on your people is far less. So we've been delving, and that's my area that I've been kind of shepherding, is the global market evolution from that aspect.
It's fantastic. So I heard you allude to the fact that Harry was receiving some physical threats as he was getting kind of good at doing this work. And I also have read that in one press release, you all say that the numbers were as high as 30% in terms of minority contracting under George Bush's administration. Tell me, what accounted for that rise, right? And then what has changed since then? Because the numbers have declined significantly, right?
Yes. I think the big turning point under George Bush, and let me take a step back from another perspective here. We as individuals are of a mindset, and technically we're independent. We're neither necessarily Democratic nor Republican, and as you advocate on behalf of a cause, of a disposition, of an entrepreneur, and particularly a black entrepreneur, different administrations, regardless of whether they're red or blue or independent, whatever, they have different approaches and different policies. And we really had initially felt that it's very possible that George Bush could have been one of the worst presidents. And this was at the time and coming out of the Clinton administration, and what we had started to realize, different successes within the other challenges. So you get certain things that that an administration does that aren't helpful, and then they kind of like I hate to use this phrase, but throw you a bone. They give you a little something over here, but there's the institutional challenge or problems or the systemic problems that continue on and on and on through the decades. And it has a approach where do they want to dig in and stir that up or not? So to kind of, they have a phrase called kicking the can down the road. Well, they'll do a little something to calm some people down and whatever. Well, the big thing that happened under George Bush was Katrina. When Katrina hit, particularly like that Ninth Ward down there in New Orleans, there are, and you probably have something similar in your area as well, and I think some of the disaster relief, but FEMA has a standing contract with maybe 10 huge companies. And when a disaster hits, they don't have to talk to anybody. They don't have to wait. They just come in and start going to work. They're already under contract, and it was designed to be set up for the reaction time to be immediate. And so there were many, almost all the local businesses. And the best example was in the mortuary sciences area. So there were a lot of people that died and lost their lives in Katrina, and many of them were black, and they lived in the Ninth Ward, the disenfranchised, the poor area. It was the hood, and many families had a funeral home or were connected to a church, and that church was connected to a funeral home where they wanted to be able to say, can you take care of the body? Well, through FEMA, and this was under a company that people probably heard of called Halliburton, that had, which is another nemesis to black business in many cases, is a bundled contract. So they had the contract to do a lot of different types of services, but one of the types of things that they kind of fell under their area of responsibility was mortuary services. So they had subcontracted to a company from Brazil that you couldn't go in and you couldn't get your family out body-wise and deal with it and get them buried for having to go through some company from Brazil, and it was outrageous. There were we had a company that called us up and told us that it was a black man, an African American man, and we really didn't want to kind of believe it. He said he owned a concrete company, and that FEMA had come in and used bolt cutters, cut open his inventory. And inventory in this case is gravel and sand and things you use to make concrete with, and they just took it. And when you saw on TV these huge bags that were dropping from helicopters trying to stop the overflow of the jetties, the retaining walls that were the canals were built on, the actual land is below sea level. So they had built up the walls, and the name slips my mind. It'll come back of what they're actually called, but they are to protect the canals of water from coming over the sides and flooding these areas. Well, Katrina was so heavy that it washed out these walls, these hills, like they were made of soil on the sides of the canal, and so they were trying to catch them up. So they took his product, and I believe at the time it was over $650,000 worth of inventory, and he was calling us up and said, listen, they're not going to pay me. They're just taking it, and they're claiming it, and nobody's doing anything. And we said, what? So basically what happened was Harry had wrote some articles, and there was a gentleman that worked for President Bush named Karl Rove. Karl Rove was very intelligent and astute, and he would pick up on social media, news items. Social media back then wasn't anywhere near like it is now. But they picked up on it, and they said, Harry, listen, come on in for a meeting and tell us what's going on. And surprisingly, they didn't really know the on-the-ground incidents of what was really going on. And so Harry came in and said, listen, you've got to do something about this. This is outrageous, and we can't support it. We won't, we were really jumping up and down on their desk and rattling and raising Cain. And it was a time where they had to listen because of all the images on television and everything else about who was affected by Katrina and what were they doing to these people, and the images of all these people living in the Superdome and the people trying to cross the bridge. And it was just a really challenging time on how do you govern all your people, not just some of your people. How do you take care of folks? So essentially, he said, Harry, give us 2 weeks and then go back to, these were the huge construction companies primarily. There was Halliburton, there was Shaw Bechtel, there were a couple other huge household name type construction companies. And he said, give me 2 weeks and you go call them up. Well, ultimately, when we called them back in 2 weeks, they said, listen, what do you need? What do you want? Here's what we got. So ultimately, there ended up being something like $6 billion worth of contracts that went to black businesses as a result of that. And that was a clear indication of us of the implement and the compliance, if you will, with guidelines or whatever. In this case, it was a little bit more emergency, so it had a little less to do with guidelines, but it had everything to do with it when you're at zero and you go from 0 to maybe 1.6% or 2%, where the guidelines say you're supposed to be up maybe around 8, 9, 10, or 12%.
Right.
And so
I got
after
you, Chuck.
that...
Let me cut you for one moment. We're going to actually take a quick break. We'll be back with Chuck DeVoe, Vice President of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, and we'll talk with one Hampton University alum who's developed a national platform for stock education. We are here with Chuck DeVoe, the Vice President of the National Black Chamber of Commerce, having a conversation about federal government contracting. Chuck, you still there with us?
Yes, I am.
Awesome. Thanks so much for everything you've shared thus far. I've got a question for you. I understand that the National Black Chamber has an initiative underway, something called Project Phoenix, that is supposed to impact equity with regard to government contracting. Can you talk to us about that initiative and how that is actually working?
We've been looking at really our constituencies on one hand, which in the case of the chamber is a reference, really initially started out for those businesses that were trying to do business with the government. And so traditionally those businesses are a little bit more organized and sophisticated as the paperwork and the types of auditing type activity that goes on to make sure that you are who you are. And it's quite different from self-certification as you get in many state situations where we're often looking at 8A certification with the SBA, and it's quite detailed. So the issue that came about was that there are a number of companies, a good number, that, and I believe it's over 5,000, something like 5,600, that are actually certified as 8A businesses, but less than a handful. I mean, really obscene bad numbers are actually getting contracts. And so your gut reaction is to charge the hill and go after the government and say, this is terrible. What's wrong? But when you drill down into it and get into exactly what has happened and why and really get to the nuts and bolts of it, often you find out that there's a lot of texts that are called, and I say that as a cliche, where little things like a letter was off on their email address, on their application or on the record. You register into the database, and if there's something that's not exactly right, or you don't have your full capability statement or statement of qualifications, or you have not filed a tax statement, or any of these kinds of little things, or you owe the government something or something. There's all these reasons as to why you're immediately kicked out of consideration. Then there is a whole other part. So let's call that the technical aspect.
Yeah.
Is your paperwork in order?
And just to be clear, it sounds like you're saying that perhaps we're just more likely to make those kinds of mistakes, and that's why there's the disparity that exists.
Yes, but it's not ethnically systemic.
Okay.
It has anybody and everybody, and so you've got some huge corporations that maybe have a whole department that just works on this stuff. They got lawyers assigned to it, accountants assigned to it. There is a large defense contractor that we know from working with. They got 6 people that are going to these contracting officers with the government and hitting it from 6 different angles.
Okay.
But these are companies.
So we may not be staffed well enough to take advantage of these kinds of opportunities. Then could be
let's not say it exactly like staffed well enough, but it's kind of like, what do you have to work with in comparison? And so
few
in
resources.
This case,
right?
Yeah,
okay.
Right. And how do you do it? So one of the approaches was, well, we're going to hire this attorney, and this attorney is, these attorneys might charge them, I've heard, anything from $5,000 to $30,000 to get their quote-unquote paperwork proper. And in many cases, let's say 70% of it or something, okay, so the paperwork's done right. Now what? Well, you get your membership card and you get to come in and compete. Then what happens? Then you get in there and you find that there is these other companies. In many cases, they're made to look like they're parallel to you. And you had mentioned it in the beginning about when this was a good one, when there was a bill that was passed under President Clinton that had to do with China, and I forgot exactly what it was, but what they do is, buried in the thousands of pages relating to the bill against China, there'll be something in there that says now white women can officially be recognized as minorities.
Right.
And so suddenly, out of nowhere, you had all these businesses that were quote-unquote minority businesses by a white woman, but the woman hadn't really been in business. But what happened was
but had access to greater resources to be able to obviously access the contracts.
I'll be blunt. They were front. They were fronts. They were really the same old people who had put their wife in a company. And the other one happens too, and this is nothing new. And if you have any 8A contractors, let's say about the Alaskan Native corporations. They are 8A in perpetuity, meaning forever.
Chuck, let me stop you there because we're getting short on time, and I need to ask you this question, right? So what advice do you give to those kind of just starting out in this government contracting space? They've got a great company, and now they're ready to sort of enter the big leagues. What does the NBCC offer that can help by way of mentorship resources? How do you walk someone through this process?
We don't really mess around. We put you right with experts that can tell you, and that can go right in the database, and we can pull up. If you got a company now, it's an 8A company, we can pull it up and look and see what most likely why you're not getting any contracts.
So that's huge. The first step is go ahead and get the 8A certification and then come to you, you're saying. Yes, however, it doesn't always happen that way. There's a whole lot of people getting work that aren't 8A. Okay. And part of it is you've got, we used to frown on brokers. People let me give you an example.
Here's a black business. He was out of somewhere further out in the Midwest, like Kansas or Oklahoma, somewhere like that. And he was a TV guy. That was the name of his business, something like Mike the TV Guy. And he found a opportunity to sell, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 big screens. It was maybe $3,000 to $5,000 contract to sell some flat screen TVs to a military base or something like that. And because it was so small, they didn't have to go through a big process on RFPs and all that kind of stuff. That's what they call sole source. So make a long story short, he figured out, he learned the system because you could say he got a break, but it wasn't a whole lot of people compete for something that small. Well, this guy learned the system. He turned around, found out they needed some motor oil. So he gets on eBay or something like that and turns around and they say, well, how much you want to pay for it? And the contracting officer says, well, we know Mike the TV guy, and he's in our books. We don't have to go through the vetting process. We don't have to do all that. He can sell us the oil.
I love it.
Yeah, he got the deal. And so next deal, I think, was maybe $15,000. Then he found something else they needed that was maybe $100,000. Then he did another one or two or three more, and the guys ended up going over $5 million.
Chuck, we absolutely have to have you on this show on a monthly basis. You are just a tremendous resource. We need to know where the opportunities are. That's really the question that people are asking. And, they'd like to be able to have their hand held a little bit to get to that money. So I want to thank you so much for being a guest. And, you're always welcome to come back.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me, and look forward to it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Chuck. It's time for hashtag add this to the list. Powered by Hair by Aisha. For all your hair care and styling needs, 757-816-6297. That is Hair by Aisha. Today, we're adding an incredible resource to the list that will assist in entrepreneurship through a better understanding of the stock market. I want to share this gentleman's bio. He is a Hampton University alum. Mr. J.R. Fenwick is the founder and CEO of flipthatstock.com and holdthatstock.com. Education and technology companies that specialize in teaching people how the stock market works and how to make money flipping and holding stocks using the latest technology. As I mentioned, he is a graduate of Hampton University with a degree in nursing/pre-med at the urging of his father, a doctor, and his mother, a nurse. After he graduated, he went on to work in a hospital as an RN for 1 year. Not really wanting to go to medical school, he entered corporate America, taking on various positions in sales and marketing in the pharmaceutical, medical equipment, and diagnostic industries. However, his true passion was being an entrepreneur. While at his corporate job, Fenwick began teaching each of his passions, including recording and producing music, martial arts, coaching, and marketing, and turning them into profitable little businesses that combined surpassed his 6-figure corporate salary, and he quit his $100,000 a year job. He went on to write the award-winning book, How I Quit My $100,000 a Year Job, to inspire, motivate, and educate others on how to turn their passions into profits. He even launched a TV show called The Kick Your Boss to the Curb Show. He became a featured speaker at many entrepreneur conferences on the topic of turning your passions into profits. Little did Fenwick know that after purchasing a piece of music equipment for his recording studio from a stranger, who later became one of his best friends, that he would develop his biggest passion of all, the stock market. His new friend encouraged him to learn how the stock market works and how to actively find, research, analyze, and buy and sell stocks. Fenwick began learning about the stock market from his friend and taking stock market courses, and even hiring a personal coach to accelerate his learning. He started investing or holding stocks and then began trading or flipping stocks. He developed a talent and a skill for flipping stocks. He began telling his friends about how the stock market works, and they began asking him to teach them. They also began telling others about him, and soon Fenwick was getting requests from all across the country to teach how the stock market works and how to flip stocks. That's when Fenwick actually started flipthatstock.com. Since starting flipthatstock.com, Fenwick has been featured on numerous radio shows, giving him insights on the stock market. He's also the featured speaker on the stock market and how to build a successful business at numerous conferences across the country. He recently started Hold That Stock for those interested in learning a fun and easy way to invest in the stock market from their Android and iPhones. His new book, How I Quit My Job and Built $1 Million Company, is scheduled for release later this year. Outside of work, JR enjoys spending time with his family, working out, studying and teaching martial arts, and writing, recording and producing music, and playing guitar. And now we've got Mr. J.R. Fenwick on the line. Mr. Fenwick, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Welcome to the call.
All right. Thank you. Glad to be on board.
Thanks so much for being here. So I've shared your bio with our listeners already. If you could just talk a little bit sort of about your background and how it is that you ended up becoming involved in the stock market, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up in Ohio, and I kind of have an interesting background because my father was a doctor, my mother was a nurse, and so the game plan was for me to go on to become a physician or a dentist. And I went on and I attended Hampton University, and so down in, it holds a special place in my heart down in the Tidewater area. So I graduated from Hampton University with a unique degree, a nursing pre-med degree. And after graduating, I went on to work in a hospital. And while working there, I decided, it really wasn't my passion or desire to go on to become a doctor or a dentist. My true passion was I wanted to be a professional musician, a guitarist. I've been playing guitar since I was age 7.
Got it.
And so I worked at the hospital. I left, and when I left the hospital, my mother called me one day and told me about a position called a pharmaceutical sales rep. Mm-hmm. And they were going through a massive expansion. And all I remember her saying was, you get a company car, you get to wear suits, you get to work from home.
Nice.
So I'm like, hey, I can do that. I can definitely do that.
Right.
So I got this job as a pharmaceutical sales rep. Didn't even really know what it was back then. A lot of people know about it now. We go in and teach doctors about drugs that they prescribe. And so from there, I started saving up my bonus checks and building a recording studio. And along the way of building this recording studio, I was buying a piece of equipment from a guy who's one of my best friends now named Jeff. And it just so happens that a couple years after I met Jeff, he had a studio too. He just asked me, did I trade in the stock market? And I was like, I don't trade in the stock market. I don't know anything about the stock market. And quite frankly, I'm not interested in the stock market.
Right.
That's probably about 17 years ago. Because I had my studio going. That was my passion. I put out a book. I quit corporate America. I put a book out, How I Quit My $100,000 a Year Job, to inspire and encourage people to go after their passions and their dreams. So I kind of became known as this person who could teach you how to, be an entrepreneur and build a business around your passions. Mm-hmm. So I really had no interest in the stock market at that time. But Jeff stayed on me for 2 years until he just wore me down. And what he was saying was making sense.
Yeah.
This is making sense. Like, everything goes through the stock market. You can't be a real businessman if you don't know how the stock market works.
Right.
And so I'm giving you the short version, but that's how I got involved in the stock market. And
I love it. I love it, JR.
Yeah.
Actually, and this is Black Wall Street Today. I'm your host, Blair Durham. We're here with JR Fenwick, who is the CEO of Flip That Stock. Let me ask you, JR, I want to kind of dive right in. What are some of the myths associated with the stock market? Obviously, 17 years, you've learned a ton, right? What are some of those myths?
Yeah, I hear it all. Here's the top probably 4 or 5. First one is you got to be rich. You got to be rich. That's a rich people thing.
And that's not true?
No, it's not true. I mean, maybe think about this. A lot of people got rich because they got in the stock market.
Right. Okay.
And so entrepreneurship plus the stock market is a perfect combination. Look at all the wealthiest people in the world. If you take Jeff Bezos, who's the founder of Amazon, right?
Yes.
He started this little company called Amazon. As it grew, he got stock ownership. It's the stock ownership in the company that makes him the wealthiest man in the world. What about Bill Gates? Started this little company called Microsoft in his garage, grew it, became one of the wealthiest men in the world. Well, they don't pay him $50 billion a year. It's because of the stock ownership in his company. Let's take this guy, Steve Jobs, who started Apple. Same thing, started in his garage, built it up, got stock ownership. Elon Musk of Tesla started this company, got stock ownership. That's where the wealth is. Even a shining black example is Kathy Hughes, owner of Radio One and TV One. All right, started this company, and then she took the company public. That's where the wealth comes from. So you don't have to start off wealthy. You just get in the game. So that's one thing. Another one is you got to have a degree. You got to have a certificate. You got to have a license to get in the stock market. Stop it. No, you don't. You don't have to have any of that to buy and sell stock for yourself. Okay. No license, no certificate, no degree. Now, if you're out here and you're giving people stock advice as an advisor and stuff like that, yeah, you need to get licensed. But if you're doing it for yourself, you don't have to have any license. You don't even have to have a degree. You know, you do have to be educated on the market, but you don't have to have a degree. Another one, I hear this one, it's gambling. You're gambling when you go in the market. Well, I'll call myself a common sense person. If 90+% of wealthy people are in the stock market in some way, shape, or form, are they just excessive gamblers, or do they know something we don't know?
Good question.
See, it's not gambling. You control your risk when you go into the market, but people don't know that. You can say exactly you can say, I'm willing to risk $20. If the stock doesn't do what I want it to do, then you can put certain measures in there that are automated to sell that stock for you and get you out of it. A lot of people don't know this. And then another one that I hear all the time, it's just too complicated. This thing, it just looks.
And that's not true, JR. It's not too complicated.
It is not true. It is not. It's not complicated when it's taught in the right fashion. And I learned that I have this talent for teaching it mainly because of my health background. I had to learn a lot of complex information and then go teach it to the doctors. And the doctors don't want me coming in there talking about chemical structures, right? Yeah, what does the drug do? You know, what are the side effects? How many times do they take it a day? Stuff. So we had to learn all this and simplify it. So everything I do now, I just look at it, and I look at what some of these people who I meet at these conferences who are trading and investing in stocks, they don't have no pre-med degree from Hampton University. They ain't smarter than me. So I'm like, oh, no. It's the desire. It's the desire. That's what it gets down to. Your desire and your priority to learn it.
You're listening to Black Wall Street Today with Blair Durham. I'm here with CEO of Flip That Stock, Mr. J.R. Fenwick. I've got to ask you this, J.R. What is the one thing that you learned that you couldn't believe after learning about how the stock market works?
Well, I hope your audience is sitting down, because when I learned this, I almost dialed 911. And I learned that we all understand the concept of you can buy a stock low and sell it high and make a profit.
Right.
All right?
Low, high,
and first of all, let me just say, right, so all a stock is a share of ownership, a piece of ownership in a company. So let's say that piece of ownership, you pay $20 per share. And let's say it goes up to $25. Okay, well, you made $5 per share. All right. If you have 100 shares, you just take 5 times 100, and you made $500. Right. But did you know that you could also make money if that stock went from $25 down to $20? So you can make money when the stock goes up, and you can make money when the stock goes down, but nobody talks about that on TV. All you hear on TV is, oh my God, the stock market's crashing. But behind the curtains, there's people like me saying, crash, baby, crash. Because there's a technique of doing something called shorting a stock that very few people know about. Everybody on Wall Street knows about it, and everybody does it every single day. Shorting a stock. And shorting a stock. And that's where you make money when a stock goes down in value. And there's steps to learning it, just like there's steps to learning anything else. But once you learn it, now you have the opportunity to make money when a stock goes up and when a stock comes down.
I want to apologize to the listeners. We've got some people wanting to call in, but we've already got you calling in, and so we can't take any calls. I apologize. If you want to post a question on Black Wall Street Today on Facebook, please post a question there. I will get the answer for you and respond. How's that? Let me ask this. We've got 2 minutes, JR. What's the difference between investing and trading?
Great question. Real quickly, investing is where you buy and hold a stock for 1 year or longer. You're looking to buy low, sell high in the future, college tuition, retirement, vacation, something like that. Trading is where you buy and sell over a short period of time. It could be months, weeks, days, minutes, hours, even seconds. Right. You're in it to make right now money. Okay. So those are there's a big difference.
Huge. And then what would you say is the number one reason people actually lose money in the stock market?
The number one reason people lose money is because they just focus on the money instead of focusing on the 3-step process of learn, practice, do. Imagine if you got in your car and you didn't know how to drive your car, but all you focused on was, hey, I want to drive my car to the park and show all my friends my car. But you didn't know the process of driving. And that's what people do. They just focus on the money. No, that's backwards. Focus on the education, focus on the practice. That gets you to the doing. So it's a 3-step process.
3 steps. I got it. Hey, listen, JR, I'm looking forward to having you back on the show on a recurring basis. I want to thank you so much. Stay with us online at Black Wall Street Today on Facebook and Black Wall Street Today on Instagram. And then follow us on Twitter as well at BWS Today. We look forward to talking again next week. Have a wonderful week.